Welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. Got a great program for you today. A little later in the program, our Salvador Rivera is going to have a guest to talk about a multitude of different topics, so we're looking forward to that. But first, as always, let's go ahead and take a look at what's trending across the border, starting with a federal judge says immigration officers in the Chicago area will be required to wear body cameras. This comes about after they used tear gas and other aggressive steps against protesters earlier this week. U.S. District Judge Sarah Ellis says she was, quote, a little startled after seeing TV images of clashes between agents and the public during President Donald Trump's administration's immigration crackdown. Last week, she said agents must wear badges. She also banned them from using certain riot control techniques against peaceful protesters and journalists. Quote, I live in Chicago, if folks haven't noticed, she said, and I'm not blind, right? I'm getting images and seeing images on the news, in the paper, reading reports where I'm having conversations about my order being followed, the judge said. A lawyer for the government says news media reports have been, quote, one-sided. Last year, ICE began deploying about 1,600 body cameras to agents assigned to enforcement and removal operations. For your second story this afternoon, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says her government has no information regarding claims by the Trump administration that cartels are offering bounties for U.S. immigration officials. That's according to a report in The Guardian. The Department of Homeland Security claims that Mexican cartels were coordinating with U.S.-based gangs to target agency officials. On the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem posted these criminal networks are now placing bounties on the heads of our agents, up to $50,000 for murder. Her post went on to say that, quote, their campaign of terror against the brave men and women who protect our homeland will be crushed and these cartel members will be brought to their knees, end quote. During her Wednesday news conference, President Sheinbaum said, we are requesting information, but there is none. We learned of this just like you via the Department of Homeland Security's publication. Now, organized crime experts are expressing skepticism of these claims. Time now to bring in our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, over on a topic, before we get to the guest a little later in the program, on a topic that's been kind of burning in the background here, and that is the requirement now for truck drivers to start to speak and be proficient in English. Sal, fill us in.
Well, this is something that we've been hearing about since April when President Trump sort of reinstituted an old law mandating that truck drivers have some sort of knowledge of the English language, be able to read signs and sort of communicate with law enforcement. He said that this was a way to make our highways a lot safer. Now, keep in mind, this is 6 months now into the making. And according to the Mexico's Northwest Freight Association, about 55 truckers have lost their license to drive north of the border. And the way it works is that the truckers, once they cross the border and they're on our highways, they may be pulled over. And at that point is when they're giving an evaluation by law enforcement. If they fail this very simple test, they will lose their licenses to drive north of the border. Now, this all came about long ago when President Obama was in office, and there was a need for truck drivers as NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, was taking off. There was a great need for truck drivers to navigate the border. Initially, NAFTA called for most of the loads to be driven across the border, and then they would have to be transferred to American-based drivers to drive it the rest of the way to destinations all across the United States. So he said, we need the drivers. It's no sense in these guys having to stop, drop off their loads, and then go back to Mexico. So a lot of the drivers were given licenses to drive all the way into the U.S. and deliver those materials, those products to the United States. But President Trump has said that this was not good, that this was creating a lot of dangerous situations for drivers, commuters in the United States. And now he is pointing, the Department of Transportation is pointing to an accident that took place about 6 weeks ago in Florida. A Indian national driving in the United States unlawfully. He apparently did not see or did not read a sign that said no U-turns were allowed on a highway. He attempted to make such a turn and in the process jackknifed his vehicle and collided with a van, killing three of the passengers in that minivan. Now, the Department of Transportation is telling states like California, Washington, and New Mexico to start cracking down on drivers, something that the state of California, through its California Highway Patrol, has said it will not do. It will not remove licenses from drivers simply because they can't speak Spanish. Now, we were talking to truck drivers a couple of days ago here at a truck stop in Otay Mesa, and we were telling them about what's going on the highways. And they were telling us that they feel pretty good about driving in California where the regulations are very lax, but they are afraid of driving in Texas and Arkansas where they are really cracking down. And according to Mexico's Northwest Freight Association, most of the licenses that have been revoked, Rudy, have taken place in Texas and Arkansas. Now, the Department of Transportation is saying or threatening California, Washington, New Mexico, and other states that they will not receive transportation funds unless they start enforcing these rules, mandating that drivers do, in fact, have some knowledge of the English language and can communicate effectively with law enforcement. And most of all, that they can read road signs to, again, in their words, make it safer for drivers in the United States.
Now, it's interesting that we bring this up because just recently we've reported here, both locally and on borderreport.com, that the state of Texas, as you mentioned, kind of cracking down on these sorts of drivers, that they've actually started denying these CDL licenses for potential truck drivers if they are DACA recipients or refugees or asylum recipients. They're not going to be able to renew or apply for this CDL. Is that kind of playing into anything that you're seeing out on your side of the border?
Well, that is part of it, but keep in mind that a lot of these licenses, a lot of these drivers work for companies based in Mexico. So they cross the border, and unless they are stopped, unless they have a background check of sorts, once they're stopped, nobody will know if they are DACA recipients or they are seeking asylum or refugees. So that plays a very small role. Keep in mind that according to the Freight Truckers Association in Mexico, Northwest Mexico, there are 80,000 truckers based in Mexico who work along the southern border, who cross the border to deliver goods and products. And they are telling us that about 80% of those truckers don't speak English. So the numbers are there.
Yeah, and the economic impact is massive. A few years ago when Operation Lone Star started here in the state of Texas under Governor Greg Abbott, one of the things that he was having ordered DPS to do is to stop trucks before they made their way past the border before they could go any further north. And that was causing a huge pileup. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but the economic damage to the city of Pharr alone, which is about 25 miles to the west of us from here in Harlingen, that is a big trade zone right there. They recently just broke ground on several warehouses there for those truckers that you mentioned, bringing the stuff over from Mexico so that the American truckers can come in, pick it up, and take it to its final destination. But we're talking in the millions per day. The city of Pharr estimated that they were losing just based on that. And could you repeat that number one more time about how many truckers?
There were 80,000 truckers that work the border, the southern border. Most of them are based in Mexico. So it's huge numbers. And it is not very practical. Here in California, once the truckers get across the border, they go through California Highway Patrol weight stations. And the way the CHP officers pull some of these vehicles out for they do inspections, vehicle inspections, and so at that point is when they would ask questions about their English literacy. But again, it's not very practical. They can't pull everybody over. The way it works is the trucks have a sticker on their right window, and if it's expired at that point, CHP officers, California Highway Patrol officers, have the option to say, "Hey, come on in. It's time to do a vehicle inspection." And at that point, they would start asking about their English proficiency. But it's just not practical. It's impossible to do when you have so many truckers crossing the border on a daily basis.
You know, switching gears, but still kind of staying in the same economic and trade realm. You have some reporting today today also an expansion at one of your ports of entry out there in your area of responsibility. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. The San Ysidro Port of Entry, which is regarded, known as the busiest port of entry in the Western Hemisphere. Every day there's about 50,000 cars across the border, and it is an impediment because, or impediment to our economy, impediment to a better service back and forth across the border. People wait hours, 2 to 4 hours to cross the border. So it's not very proficient as a way to improve the economy because a lot of these people are going to work, they're going to go to school, they're doing a lot to improve and help the economy of both countries. But by having to wait in line, that just defeats the purpose. So now there are plans, there are many strategies out there. One is to offer more mass transportation, such as buses and ferries and shuttles to get people across the border faster. But that is, again, it's just something that's being proposed. We're also told that as of November, the lanes, the traffic lanes that you see, the northbound lanes, will be realigned as a way to get people to entry, improve the flow of traffic into the sentry lanes, the ready lanes, and the all access lanes. And this is, again, strategies to hopefully get people across the border faster and improve the flow, improve the economy, improve the quality of life of people who sometimes wait 2 to 4 hours to simply get north of the border to get to their jobs. A lot of these folks have to get up at 3, 4 in the morning just to get in line to wait, and so they're not late for work. So again, the idea is to get people across the border faster, either by adding more busings, more shuttles, and by simply improving the flow of the traffic lanes into the U.S. So this is something that's being discussed. But a lot of these projects, a lot of these ideas have yet to be cleared by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So until they give the go-ahead, a lot of the stuff will continue, will remain. The long waits will stay here for the time being.
Ashamedly, I say that sometimes I just kind of avoid family gatherings across the border because I don't want to wait those 3 hours. I couldn't imagine having to make that commute both ways every single day. It's a lot of time.
That's a very good point you're making because now the waits are also in a southbound direction where it used to be just simply heading north,
Mhm.
but now, unfortunately, it's become a fact of life, part of the routine to wait another 2 hours heading home to Mexico. So, on a given day, you might be spending 5 to 6 hours just commuting to and from work. It's a horrible way, but a lot of people do it because they got to make a living. They got to make
Mhm.
and provide for their families.
All right. Well, thank you so much for reporting on this,
Mhm.
Salvador. We're going to keep you here, though, because you've got a guest coming up, Ricky Garza with the Southern Borders Communities Coalition. We'll be right back. Border Report Live is back in a minute. Welcome back. Rudy Mireles here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Joining me once again, our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, along with our guest for today's program, Mr. Ricky Garza from the Southern Border Communities Coalition. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Rudy. Let's start that, Ricky, if you don't mind, fill us in on what the Southern Border Communities Coalition is all about.
Yeah, so the Southern Border Communities Coalition is a group spanning groups from immigrant rights organizations, border organizations, all the way from San Diego in California to Brownsville, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. I am based here in McAllen, Texas, in the RGV, and what we do is we work on human rights, on things that respect immigrants' rights, but also the rights of border residents and everyone who passes through our region and calls the region home.
Now, you are concerned with this waiver of several environmental laws. Discuss what's going on and what specifically happened this week in Washington.
Yes, so in the last week, despite the government shutdown dragging on, we've seen a number of harmful actions happen related to the border wall. There, if you recall, there was the massive reconciliation bill, also called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, that was passed back in the summer in July. So that law is now in effect. And what that law did was provide tens of billions of dollars for new border wall construction that is actually completely unaffected by the shutdown right now. So what the government has said, the Trump administration, is that they are going to move forward with awarding contracts, with doing construction, with essentially funding and allowing to go forward the work of the Department of Homeland Security, right? So you see that in the ICE raids and the CBP activities, and unfortunately also in this border wall construction. So what they've done in the last week is really two things. The first is they announced an unprecedented number of 9 waivers. There's this authority, there's this law going back to the early 2000s that says the DHS secretary can waive all laws related to border wall construction to essentially clear the way for faster construction. So things like environmental laws, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, these basic protections that we take for granted everywhere else in the country, we do not have those same protections in the border region when it comes to border wall construction. So what Kristi Noem, the DHS secretary, did yesterday was announce a waiver of dozens of laws related to contracting, to fair business practices, to procurement, to things related to prevent corruption, really across the entire border region. So they published 9 different waivers. Each one of those waivers is for a different Border Patrol sector, and they actually covered all 9 Southwest Border Patrol sectors, from the San Diego sector, covering most of the west coast, close to San Diego, all the way to the RGV sector in Texas. And that means that we're not going to have the equal protection of the laws when it comes to construction. And the second thing they did was they announced a bunch of contracts that were being awarded for the actual construction. It was 10 contracts for over $4 billion of border wall construction, spanning different pieces of the border wall, all the way from the San Diego region to the Brownsville region. And that includes things like actual new wall construction and things like the dangerous border buoys that have gone into the river in Eagle Pass in Texas, and are now slated to go into the Rio Grande in Cameron County in Texas.
Discuss how these projects harm and damage communities up and down the southern border.
So this is really harmful because these are basic laws that we take for granted. Like, we take for granted living in the United States that we are supposed to have clean water. We are supposed to have Clean Air Act. These are things that go back decades and decades. And what has happened is we've given these broad powers under this really hostile administration, but it really has gone back, all the way to the early 2000s when this law was enacted, that all of these laws can actually be waived when it comes to construction. So that means environmental impact statements are not being done when they are tearing up our communities and building far away from the actual border. They are really doing things that, in any other context, if you were putting together a $1 billion infrastructure project, there would be all sorts of environmental reviews, all sorts of safeguards that must be in place, all sorts of contracting protections. But when it comes to this one project, when there are so many things in our region that we need clean water, we need clean air, we need good healthcare, access to education, all of these things that we are lacking in the border region, it gets all pushed aside in favor of this dangerous border wall. And we know that there is a human cost. We know that when the wall is put in, when they make it higher, more people are going to die, right? Like, more people are going to fall off the border wall, more people are going to die in the desert. And we've seen that borne out in data from the Southwest, from the El Paso border wall, from the San Diego border wall, and all the places in between. So it really is going to lead to a lot more harm. And that is really devastating for our community, that this is what we get. This is the new thing that the government is choosing to do, despite being in a government shutdown.
Ricky, describe the lack of competition for this contracts and how this construction actually ends up costing taxpayers a lot more money than it should.
So we've seen historically that there are massive cost overruns in all the border wall construction that has happened. There have been numerous scandals with contracts awarded to unscrupulous contractors, and these laws are really designed to prevent that. And what we saw, with these new waivers, is that the administration doesn't care about that. It doesn't care about protecting the funds of taxpayers and the funds of the federal government. And when you see so much money being thrown around, it really is hard to think that this is not going to be dangerous for our community. And across the border, we're seeing fewer and fewer places that really don't have wall construction. In every region of the border, we're seeing new walls go up. Where there was no wall, there is now wall. Where there was once short barriers, there are now tall barriers. Where there were once barriers, there are now double barriers. In um, certain parts of the border, the wall is layered, and there are now multiple levels of border wall. So it really is harmful. And um, I think as a border resident, we want to be treated equally to everyone else. I want to be able to live with the equal protection of the laws that we get, whether you're upstate in Texas, whether you're in New York, or whether you are living on the border in the Rio Grande Valley. And that is not what this administration has done historically and now.
Well, Ricky, the administration says that the barriers, the buoys are necessary to improve our national security, to keep drugs and criminals out of the country. Obviously, you don't agree with that statement. Tell us about how, this work is going on in spite of the government shutdown, and all this money continues to flow, continues to be spent on these projects. Tell us how this funding could be better spent in other areas.
Yeah, so I think growing up on the border, you always hear that there is not enough money for anything. It may be different in different regions, but in my region, there's a lot of flooding, there is a lack of flood control, there's a lack of ditches and infrastructure to really protect our population that is growing a lot in the Rio Grande Valley. And we always hear there's not enough money for that. They have to raise taxes to be able to get even a small fraction of what we really need for flood control. But you see the government does have money. There was tens of billions of dollars that were just passed for border wall construction, but yet we really have to scramble to be able to get just a small fraction of what we really need for things like flood control, for things like healthcare disparities that we have, education disparities, low income disparities, all of these things that really could use real investment from the federal and state government. And instead, we get things like Operation Lone Star from the state of Texas that is harming people. We get things like the so-called Big Beautiful Bill that ends up being will be a disaster for border communities. So this is something that I think is definitely frustrating for us that live and work and travel through the border region.
Ricky, describe the frustration, knowing that no matter what you try to do, you follow the law, you go to court, as loud as you might scream, that nobody is really listening, and the Trump administration is going to do what it wants to do, something that we saw during the first Trump administration. To talk about how maddening this is, frustrating, upsetting, that no matter what you do, it doesn't seem to actually do any good, or nobody's listening.
So I think it definitely is frustrating when you have an administration that is so hostile to the rights of border communities. And I think even despite a negative situation of so many things that are working against border communities right now, I think it still is important to show up to educate people about their rights and to push back where we can. Right. So SBCC, the Southern Border Communities Coalition, we sued the Trump administration in 2019 and 2020 the first time for illegally building border wall across the Southwest with funds from the Department of Defense. It was illegal to do that, and it ended up resulting in a multi-billion-dollar settlement that did things like promise remediation for the effects of the border wall. So I think there are things that can be done. There are legal actions. There are ways to push back, but we do urge Congress, the president, all people in government to really respect the equal rights of people on the border and throughout the country, regardless of your immigration status, regardless of where you live. That should not matter for someone's human rights.
We've been speaking with Mr. Ricky Garza of the Southern Border Communities Coalition. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we appreciate you being here today. That's going to do it for this segment, but we'll be right back after a quick break. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Medelis, your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. That was an incredible guest. We were just joined by Ricky Garza of the Southern Border Communities Coalition, talk about a whole host of topics, but actually one that we kind of talked about yesterday. Our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, has broken down those contracts that Mr. Garza was talking about. If you'd like to read more about them, you can get those on borderreport.com. And don't forget, we're also available in podcast form. You can get Border Report Live on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio's app, the Spotify app, as well as YouTube. So make sure to like, subscribe, check it out today. That's going to do it for us today. For Salvador Rivera in San Diego, my name is Rudy Mireles. Have a great day.